Good afternoon, dear friends. Today, I will tell you about the conquest of northern China by Genghis Khan. 1206. Genghis Khan became the ruler of all the people's living vodka caravans. He became the Khan of the Great Steppe. Moreover, he made in the desert. Before organized, according to the building division, tribal peoples and tribes warring. Great reforms. He united all the tribes into a single force in the nation, the army, or as it is called differently in Russian, horde. The word horde have a negative connotation, but in fact, it is one roots with the word order and word German Ordnung, order, and confronts in the sense of a chaotic split from clans and tribes. Of the horde is the order of military force, is the people's army. All previous powers of the Xiongnu steppe, Turkic Uyghurs, Kyrgyz, all they were tribal power. The Mongols was the first to unite themselves in another way. They have eradicated the tribal differences, least in the idea of Genghis Khan. These differences are abolished, all united in tens of hundreds of thousands and tens of thousands. And a horde became a unified army. But what now with this army to do? Because the army is necessary first of all to feed, and even better to wrap bellies warriors, precious Chinese silk to go to take. Because each other then robbed the tribes could no longer, and there arose before Genghis Khan the fundamental problem of any steppe kept, as we have said repeatedly. In the steppe has never been a full-fledged state because every nomad were warriors accordingly. When you are on only one army, not judge, tax, internal police, nothing like the KGB or the FSB, as you will collect taxes. For to wrap the belly of their warriors, silk, and who are these taxes will pay. If you want only to fact and feature steppe powers, that there the economic base have been moved outside of these powers. They lived by operation of the civilized settled population, on which they carried out raids, took their production, will see robbery, or they took tribute from them, and therefore any of the steppe powers, though tribal, though the military had to wage war to maintain itself. But the power Genghis Khan, which essentially state that any army was very well organized, but it just an army, and more than anything, the army had to be fed, he had to wage a war. And I must say that, in 1206, Genghis Khan planned the invasion of China. He has united so the nomads in order to be able to do the unthinkable, to conquer Middle China. That could not to do before anyone. The idea seemed wild because that of all the Mongols was 800,000 people. They had 95,000 soldiers. Even as a relatively weak state of the Western Asia their guts go. And kingdoms in China account 3 million people and could muster up to 150,000 soldiers of the Great Golden Empire. Jin actually lived 48 million inhabitants at the age of Russian list. Of Chinese military authorities in the army were listed 700,000 people. Yucat, and how much was in the brazier? The entire population about the South China South, about a dream, where he lived 100 million people. I do not even gonna mention she was far away. How amazing, monstrous figures at this time. The biggest party of Western Europe, France, 25 million people, in Russia wanting a maximum of 5 to 6 million. But then I explained to you here in this video the reference tool which now appears told why this was possible. And why tell me about the millions of Marco Polo he met in China, for which he was nicknamed Mer. Genovese in a million to prison is no fairy tale, is a reflection of the reality of the Middle Ages. Why in the Far East it was possible, in Europe it's impossible at the same time. Why in Europe we're talking that there were 3,000 soldiers of 5,000 soldiers, and also a very big power in China. We talk 30,000, 100,000, and there is nothing beyond Arden. Well, look, listen, and do not break eyebrows in surprise. House everywhere around is an economic material basis. So what the image of the Mongols, which altogether with the elderly women and children were as much as dean of the emperor was just warriors, as they might think about the conquest of northern China. But as one British historian planned, Genghis Khan was more cold calculation, chess strategist. than adventurism, poker player. He was smart Genghis Khan, and he knew that the Mongols tie first of all. If we look not on the payroll of the War Department and receive therefore the Ministry of Soldering it real fighters out there, and immediately you do the amendment that the Chinese army for single soldier had 4, 5, 6, 7 staff, and accordingly 700,000 all at once, and quickly reduced to 100,000 soldiers able to fight directly with the Mongols. Rest is simply to serve the first two in the second. All these troops were times just a huge extent of the empire were occupied, including against the Mongols the garrison of the fortress of the Great Wall, which in those days was not such as today. The fact that the wall, you can see it today, was built during the Ming dynasty against the Wei-speaking Mongols, and during the Xing of the Great Wall, built by Qin Shi Huang, almost gone. She collapsed, but there were several long defensive lines interlocking to each with who lived along the Great Wall of China. They were supposed to protect it, but thanks to the clumsy action of the Jude women's administration, the White Tatars on good and defected to Genghis Khan's side. Genghis Khan gave in marriage and to the ruler. He is ready to eat al-Lahuri. He became one of his main guides through the Gobi Desert when Genghis goes to war. Genghis Khan gave one. He gave his beloved daughter Kojan to Vedic, who one joined him. Then he gave another daughter to Gorlovsky Khan, and he gave another daughter to Malakit Alahujijit Kuri, the ruler. He is ready. Both of these girls were very difficult. One, in fact, she ruled the White Tatars with her husband, Alahujijit Kuri. And then his when genes will poison him. He will not like it naturally that they're border guards. They are border Cossacks. You can say they have gone over to the side of the enemy. They are not Lotro. But Genghis Khan will give this point for the next ruler of the Whites. The Tatar will also serve the Mongols. Everything will be fine. And the daughter to manage, in fact, here, but it's known as the Virgin Warriors. She will be with a sword in the hands of the output hiking the White Tatars. The army Genghis Khan and Gurav, beloved daughter of Genghis Khan, will the all-powerful queen. Then she dies, her sister. That is another daughter, and Genghis Khan would marry Ugago. We're sitting on all the feasts at the right hand of the great Kagan Mongol, and this sister later when will Kogan land, son of Genghis Khan, to rule and execute the attempted poisoning in guides one atom held in civil court. Click the struggle. Already in the Mongolian Empire there is an interesting story in this collection, but so far here Genghis Khan secure and northern front and the eastern and western front provided against threats from the border, and was able garden in almost all his army, all 95,000 people against the establishment, which was 700,000 of them, about 100,000 combat-ready soldiers, but 15,000 heavily armed, clad in armor, cavalry. Anyway, Tijgeni was outnumbered, and the war with them was of course a huge challenge, but not enough so that Jogenes had problems with the internal unity of the empire. The second problem, you were shopping contradictions with all the surrounding peoples, fighting the post-Tom West, its neighbors, with the state of Zixia. All Westerner ahead and believed that their Gutta exchange crappy nagmi on valuable Chinese shilka, and in general flooded the Chinese market junk well. What a familiar picture, isn't it, when the hands of the Soviet Union Chufu Co-op in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous District for cooperatives China so much stuff, and all these kooky clothes will start to produce what will school them all the flea markets of the former Soviet Union in figures. The 13th century in the 21st century behave like this great trading people, and when genes are faced with the fact that their markets all the junk in exchange valuable Chinese product empire, is G not found anything better to enter the trade embargo in, so essentially severing the Silk Road, and Buddhist rulers of Yigers and Yiger merchants have relied on Genghis Khan, which was to break through these limitations, outpost, and it is possible obstacles to clear the Silk Road. The third problem, King Empire, they had a fall from a horse livestock do bad things with horse composition in while it was the cavalry decided the fate of war. And the Mongols had 500,000 to her herd of the great steppe themselves. More than the Mongols far choose the evil in all of the imperial herds were only 500,000 horses. Is 2 times less than 100 years ago. But could put Chinese Empire Lego problem was already nevertheless. The empire was a formidable opponent and Genghis Khan a strategic-minded person. The first strike would not directed at China. He first hit the whole western state Western Jia Tunguska country current Gansu province in China. As they called themselves, Great the state of White and High that, too, was a trading nation. Yes, it could to put quite a lot of troops. But these troops were defeated by the Mongols in the first battle. And then I realized that in the battlefield against his troops, their Guta can't do anything. Genghis Khan with the main forces went directly to the capital there. Huta in the city of Jensen on her way to the capital was Mountain Pass, which was defended by a 50,000 years. Gurtskaya army attacked the mountain in close conditions. Was impossible. Genghis Khan 2 months patiently waited until then good and will be able to provide him with the chance to win over them beautiful cavalry victory in the battle on the environment, but there are good they descended from their mountains. And then the Mongols played his favorite map, feigned retreat on one of the days in their camp. The noise cries in all directions at the galloping horseman army. Then began a chaotic to withdraw from the camp, and rapidly as if in a panic to melt away bent their watching. With their proud of unrest in the camp, the Mongols could not understand what was happening and when he realized that the Mongols just running flinging their yacht goods things they couldn't stand still. Is feudal medieval discipline of the troops there was like. Everyone they are like Genghis Khan so Tunguska troops came down from the mountains. Too glad to plunder the abandoned Mongolian camp and ambush the Mongols killed. In just a few minutes on the table, and on the way back to the capital, the Prince Chauvin learned that he was elected to improve the new emperor. After the death of the previous ruler and he was emperor, youths Genghis Khan knew about this, and cried as Georgie could not elect a prince in with their rulers. This case is not over because according to the Chinese rules, the gold ceremonies in Mongolia came to the Chinese embassy to proclaim the accession to the throne of the new emperor, and these ambassadors appealed to Genghis Khan, demanding to Zhu's fury Genghis Khan listened to the decree on the entry into the throne of the new emperor on his knees as a dutiful vassal. For that they brought a lot of gifts and was ready to bestow it, but this practice is Chinese. But Genghis Khan to go could no, I cannot go, he said. And instead of kneel, he deliberately spat on the south side of the Chinese capital Svarev to expel the ambassadors Georgia her away from them. All that they brought the ambassadors were so shocked the behavior of the Mongols when they returned to the Chinese capital Duzhou to not Beijing. They did not dare to talk about in his diplomatic office. Instead, they said that they would be the ceremony was held and prizes were given, but I understand. But to shame, it's an insult to increase this war. The Chinese concept of spit in the direction of the emperor is a super unthinkable. The insult is so unthinkable that here only blood can wash away this shame. Officials small. They were afraid that they just executed for what they have failed a mission. A few, so all is well. There are all accepted all, and the scandal was not continued, but underneath it all is a mature. And in the spring of 1211, Genghis Khan gathered the Kurultai at which he announced the start of the war with China. He ascended Birkenholden mountain, prayed there for 3 days, descended with her and said that heaven would grant us victory, divided the army into 2 smaller wings, and the right wing was led by Prince Louis and Chagatai. The main forces of Paul himself and 2 columns of the Mongols moved in the spring in April on Kira, between the Mogui and China. The huge Gobi Desert is about the place where the Gabi seems to be thinning, and the road is more or less normal, which in principle still passes there. There were Chinese defensive fortifications several lines of the Great Wall of the 13th century, which just did not feel that something was wrong on their northern borders, began to feverishly strengthen, and there was no way to fill the garrisons there just like that. So Genghis Khan decided to bypass Duke James's fortified lines. After passing directly through the desert for years, the man next door woke up to continue our conversation about Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan decided to bypass the fortified lines of the senses by passing directly through the desert for 650 miles along absolutely impassable rocky, red-hot Gabi, where a caravan can hardly pass. There is enough water for the caravan, but never for the army, and the emperor there can be no threat. The Mongols will not pass through here. He did not take into account that it happens 2 weeks a year. Then the Gabi becomes passable throughout its entire length, and it rains in April. In April, the snow melts. Let it accumulate a little during the winter, there are 10 to 15 centimeters, no more. But it still accumulates in Mongolia, and this water all drains away over the rolling hills. And impenetrable Gobi Desert turns into a flourishing the region, where everywhere lakes water clean taller cost flowers everywhere, and where the grass is greener, and 2 weeks a year Gabi absolutely pass, and during these 2 weeks, the Mongols spared Chinese fortified line and broke into the rear of the territory of the Empire. Jin, after learning about the attack, Lens mobilized and sent them to reflect on the 6th. We must pay tribute to the Chinese bureaucracy. This could focus against the Mongols. How to write sources for 100,000 the troops, but had we all a lot of units? There are many very efficient part of the additions, as always, because stealing on black officials in China. But nevertheless, I think that institutions in troops was much higher than that of Genghis Khan, and that the army was headed by a veteran of the war in the South China general. Worse, Alu met Genghis Khan traveler the pass, where was the outpost? Outposts, 12 fortresses defended the mountain pass, and behind them was already a direct route to Jiandun, Beijing, and here in these mountain areas stood up, and a huge Chinese army, their ears at assessing the swiftness. The movement of the Mongol horsemen did not dare to descend into the open plain. Genghis Khan could not attack Jenny, and because those besides, what a powerful position to strengthen another huge numerical superiority. So 2 months. The Mongols stood and waited, but history repeats itself. The post-time waited for James to come down, Jerry down, and then Genghis Khan sent yes, and they not only did not go down, they still ignored the right wing of the Mongol army, who headed Prince, who successfully operated against the fortress there was in the province of Shaanxi. Superiority. So 2 months. The Mongols stood and waited. But history repeats itself. The post-time waited for James to come down, Jerry down, and then Genghis Khan sent yes, and they not only did not go down, they still ignored the right wing of the Mongol army, who headed Prince, who successfully operated against the fortress there was in the province of Shaanxi. The Chinese commander. This could only run away. He ran away, changing the guard, changing the horses. He rode closest city, flogged their viceroy. He got mad, but who don't? But Genghis Khan on the emperor, which did not provide him an army capable of defeating the Mongols, and faced with the fact that after him I am way ahead of the Mongol Emperor of China. That shift him disgraced general, who shall rush to Beijing, have ridden broke into the city, killed the guard, captured emperor's youths, killed him, and proclaimed the new emperor scientist Princess Anzul, on believing him to be safe, and himself regent. Here's the deal began in the Jin Empire. Mango spread throughout rural around China, plundering, destroying, burning. All their main goal was to instill as much fear, to kill as many people as possible, and burn the most, to undermine the economic power of the enemy. But they could not really take more Chinese fortress. They were difficult and rewarding huge booty, and the end of 1211 the Mongols began to leave the steppe. As a very hot climate of China was for them unpleasant, therefore Genghis Khan Chinese summer retreated north to Lake Tuloi. Norway weighted heavy that time of the year the war we as usual, he is not limited by the fact that defeated the main forces of the empire where he also raised against them. Genghis Khan realized against James all their neighbors and vassals' long-standing ties with the White Tatars led to the fact that on good and defected to the Genghis Khan and ensured his guides through the Gobi Desert is the second time throwing with which Genghis Khan also established the secret of the relationship. Even before the war, revolted against the Mongols proclaimed the restoration of the Liao dynasty and began the war on the peninsula, where the olden eastern flank on the eastern edge of powers of to increase 3. Their Gupta offended by the fact that the Genes betrayed them during the Mongol invasion. They did not help them, conducted an embargo against them. In 1210 they gathered a huge army and attacked the Xin Empire. A then good annealed women's war began, which lasted from 1210 to 1225. It was in favor of the Mongols from the test, but they robbed there to give it to the Mongols. In fact, they helped Genghis Khan and finally the most unpleasant thing for Georgia Chinese Prince of Helium, which raised the rebellion captured the imperial herds and stole 500 horses in the steppe. Jorge not left without cavalry is of the 13th century. The rider make the decision all the more in the desert. But the Mongols who in 1212 moved again China to strike another blow won despite the initial success of stuck in the Chinese fortresses Jiben, and he went to the east on the peninsula Liaodong to take the city for Yuan, the eastern capital of the empire. Jin he approached the fortress convinced that it is perfectly protected from it occupies a large army portrayed your favorite barn reception, messy panicky retreat. Retreated by as much as 2 days away from it, and when incredulous, the Chinese realized that before snapping and went and rushed over to the web. To loot abandoned naked camp same Bistami Methil returned encircled and destroyed a Roman army under for the hivers and exploded into the open gates of the city. Lille, I was taken. It was an outstanding feat for which Jerbon and he received the military opposed. Genghis Khan also the east was sent to the emperor's brother of the great Koghan Genghis Khan brother called Kosir, and he's also very actively and successfully fought for fact base of the Manchu Empire. The Jin were blocked. There is still the uprising began. Koreans in general fooled the program successfully, but to also acted the Mongol princes that which was tasked, got an imperial all territory north of the Yellow River were subjected to a wild rout. Gauls killed all whom they could to kill, robbed, burned, destroyed in total. To China collapsed monstrous disaster. How many were destroyed? How many people are destroyed? Value is impossible to say. But the horror directly spread throughout the empire. P.S. But Genghis Khan himself, who decided to take fortress. Yes, there is a powerful fortress on the border of the empire of Jin and the great steppe. He was wounded, and after that the campaign failed. Mongol retreated immediately. I draw your attention that we sometimes say that during a trip to Russia was something incredible, was killed by Columna son of Genghis Khan. Kulka say that this never happened. Genghis Khan he was wounded at fort until the tone of his brother Hisar by the way would die during the conquest of China. So it was, but the sex was amazing. The Mongols immediately pulled all of his bones from the company. 1212 finished for them failures. But of the matter of the empire, Jin was bad in China broke out after that monstrous the invasion of the terrible famine. Harvest was simply no one to collect, course all burned and robbed, and they didn't know what to do. Generals surrendered, tribes you rebelled from the log cubs. Empire Jin. The Chinese faced with the fact that the emperor will not protect them from the hated Zhuzhai any worse than the Mongols, revolted in the Shampu. Began an uprising of red jackets, and the usual for the Chinese peasants of cruelty. They dealt Cuban invaders in general. The trouble came from all sides. 1213 3 of its campaign against China. Genghis Khan finally took the fortress. Dutton restless emperor Gorge not gathered a huge army and again threw them against the Mongols, not wanting to admit that in the field they are not as ref. On the balance of forces is, by the way, very clearly typical killers for grabbing major us. When destroying its inhabitants, radio destroying everything and then goes. And Uvala all this not to Cuba, all that stuff, which is not there. Seized watching footage of the robbery of Kuwait. The Iraqi army of Saddam Hussein in the 91st year. That's what happens when a rich city captures a horde of savages. And it was the same in ancient China here, all this great horde with the extraction and polgo. As soon as the Mongols left the emperor of all of them, he ordered to gather guard concubines, eunuchs, treasures, and leave after he moved the capital to the south. Baz and Han higher messenger rushed over to Genghis Khan to warn him about this intelligence, to convey that Georgie doesn't go to Genghis Khan. As a military man realized all this, meaning that the emperor was cheated. He goes beyond the Yellow River from there to organize resistance. There it is reach for the Mongol cavalry. He immediately turns the horde back, but not all the time. Anju escapes in the Yellow River's orders to defend the city until the last extremes. And the Mongols blocks Beijing. The assault was unsuccessful. Genghis Khan still left in the steppe, but not far so that you can monitor the siege. Osari, that was left to besiege the city. And here the Mongols wait until hunger is not mowed. Last defenders there as usual began the quarrel inside defenders. Beijing at first could not imagine that the emperor abandoned them in a second, because it was George's Sky dynasty. When the question was where to retreat, many offered to go to Manchuria, home base where the native inhabitants Jorge, not where to gather strength to sit, and then out of the woods to go to hit to their roots to cling. But they are already so ocky-lurked wreaths by this time that the decision was made to go to China South. Honghe and these Manchu patriots Eugenia, they decided to stand to the last. But when he realized that the emperor abandoned them, their leader was so angry that he went home and hanged himself. The war council was against him and offered to surrender. He surrendered. The city surrendered. He was killed immediately. The Mongols entered Beijing, grads killing, burning everything in its town harem. 100 days, 100 days. Just a million city differently. The woman is impossible. And accordingly the death of the great capital was a shock to the whole of Eastern Asia. But there was an interesting point. The walls of the imperial palace treasure was captured. Not all managed to withdraw from a Shumodzu, and is clearly the main Chinese who stayed there to supervise for all of this. He offered you two of the Mongols, the Mongol areas that broke into the palace, commanded the brother and half-brother of Genghis Khan steps Hadir. Come on. We slightly reduced the report how many captured at the daily stupid deal of soda or for split. And for Mongolian commanders immediately agreed, because it is the same holy extraction steps. But I moved tofu, said no, as can I steal something that belongs to Genghis Khan? Having this palace now belongs to Genghis Khan. This was reported to be carried out on any of Genghis Khan's sanctions. Followed Genghis Khan knew about this chair booty you have to give, but he loved it. His brother so close, Salan said, that he appointed after that the chief judge in the grill. Here all of northern China was conquered. And then Genghis Khan returned to the steppe, to never in China, not to go. He was the winner of the great empire. Jin by the end of 1215 was in ruins. She was attacked then good. And in the south Sumi China, which was shaking from the fear of Georgie them during the last war between Tinkis and occurred in 1200 for 1208, and Jorge not crossed the river Yangtze, struck Jesus defeated and forced to pay huge to the sun. They were afraid of everyone afraid, but now seeing that they are period to boot, they have not could decide what to do. Cats have decided that we will not pay tribute and murmur, but has begun immediately. Clashes on the border to the same song had supported the rebellion of the Chinese in Shampu, in general trouble from all sides. Music and Genghis Khan believed that with China finished, he left in China 23,000 soldiers. led by their best commander Flyliv, who was appointed viceroy or in Mongolian, and Chinese tense Van State. He was given all power in occupied China. Jordanian Peninsula was restored and the state of the Khitans. But then the truth itself quickly died. Nikita not very cool to help Brainiac or conquer Manchuria. And Genghis Khan returned to the steppe, started to prepare for the campaign in the West. Do you think the war in China over nothing like Giorgione, caught in a desperate situation, moved to radical methods? For any military position began to be appointed only on the basis of shelf life of the people. That the leader of the group, which will break strong unit of the Mongols, was awarded some 3,000 more than 5,000 Mongols. Generally a huge the award was given to the one who will free the Beijing, immediately appointed a field marshal. It was a decree declared all sorts of benefits were given to those who fought against the Mongols. All the power to mobilize against them. Empire not only broke it here, now rallied to the last. As literally as in the Great Patriotic the War, to the most severe measures were taken against the deserters. Traitors collected troops, looted is G.